Well, welcome once again to the 11th annual Transferring the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference. Of course, it's presented by Northeastern State University. And this conference goes till Friday the 14th, Valentine's Day. I guess you could invite your favorite person to the conference on that day. Wouldn't that be a lovely gift? As a reminder, all of our sessions are closed caption. We have the terrific Michelle doing the captioning for us. All you have to do is click on the closed caption icon on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen to see the caption. We have our session today is Teach Smarter, 5 strategies for effective and efficient online teaching. And we're fortunate to have with us once again, Jean Mandernach. Did I pronounce that right, Jean?
Actually, we pronounce it with a harder K at the end. You gave the official German pronunciation, but we pronounce it Mandernach.
Okay. Well, close. Maybe some year I'll get it correct. We've been fortunate to have Jean with us more than once in the past to do a presentation, and we're lucky to get her again. And as you see, she's the Executive Director of the Center for Innovation and Research and Teaching at Grand Canyon University. And her research focuses on enhancing student learning in the online classroom. So Jean, let me turn it over to you. I want to get smarter.
Perfect. I'll do what I can. So I'm actually going to turn off my video while I present just to save bandwidth and make sure things go a little more smoothly on your end. But I would like to encourage everyone to open up your chat and feel free to either chat in the background with each other, share examples, share experiences. If you have questions for me, go ahead and pop those in. I'll try to keep one eye on the chat, but if I miss your question, feel free to bring it up again at the end. So I have a question for you to kick things off. So if you haven't found your chat yet, go ahead and click on the chat button, and that should pop open your chat window. Here is my question. On average, how many hours do you think a full-time campus-based faculty member works per week? On average, how many hours do you think a full-time campus-based faculty member works per week? And go ahead and share your guesses in the chat. And if you haven't had a chance to mute yourself yet, go ahead and do that. It just kind of saves bandwidth and makes it a little smoother for everyone listening. As they roll in, I think I've seen a low of 25 and a high of 60 so far. Don't worry, Candy, who said you're only part-time. I've got those numbers in just a minute. We're just going to start with the full-timers. Well, what research actually tells us is that full-time campus-based faculty members are actually working about 61 hours per week. So even though most of us think as 40 is kind of like our baseline, we're working a lot more than that. And actually of that 61 hours, only about 35% of it is spent on our teaching. Well, I'm a psychologist, not a mathematician. But if we were going to do a little bit of math with this, that 35% of 61 hours is about 21 hours a week. So if you have 3 courses, that would be about 7 hours per week per course. And if you teach 4 courses, that's about 5 hours per week per course. Just to make the math easy for us, let's kind of round that out, and we'll say that on average, full-time campus-based faculty members have about 6 hours per week that they spend per course when they're teaching. Now, in contrast to that, online faculty tell us their numbers are quite different. In fact, adjunct faculty report spending about 13 hours per week per course, and full-time faculty say about 11 hours per week per course. Again, just doing some easy math here, that's a lot more. Online teaching takes time, a lot of time. And if we think about why it takes a lot of time, you kind of have to think about what the different teaching environments look like. Now, for those of you that have taught face-to-face, the clock tells us when our class starts and stops. Based on the clock starting, we start our class. And when our time is up, whether that's 45 minutes, 60 minutes, 75 minutes, if you teach a night class, it might be several hours. But when our time is up, our time is up. And if we don't stop teaching, The students don't really care. They're going to grab their backpacks, put their books away, and they're going to leave anyway. So it has really clear boundaries on our teaching time. In contrast to that, the online classroom is like always there. It's ubiquitous. It never goes away. 24/7, it is potentially there for us to be teaching. And because we don't really know what students are doing unless they do something, they leave a digital footprint, online teaching tends to be really artifact heavy. We ask them to post. We ask them to put peer replies. We ask them to make journals and discussions and post videos. We want them to leave a footprint to let us know that they're teaching. And the result of that is that online teachers report much higher levels of overload. They report being overwhelmed, buried, and in many cases, completely and totally frustrated and on the verge of burnout. The reality is for any one of us, and it doesn't matter who we are, we only have so much available time. Now, notice when I started talking about how much time it is, I didn't say how much time it takes to teach online. I said how much time do we spend teaching online. We actually have no idea how much time it takes because it takes however much we're willing to give it. We know that there's certain instructional tasks that need to be done. We have to do course development things. We're always updating, modifying, dealing with tech issues. We're participating in our discussions. We're grading. We're giving feedback. We're answering emails. We're filing reports at our universities. There's lots of stuff. But for any one of us, the amount of time that it takes is really dependent on how much time do you have available. It doesn't matter if it takes 15 hours if you only have 7 available, because you only have to give what you have to give. Time is a finite resource. And so today what we're going to talk about is how do we make the most out of that finite resource? And it's going to be different for all of us. And so for some of us, this issue of efficiency is going to be a little more important because we just don't have that many hours to give. Other people, maybe they're going to look at this and they're going to say, oh my gosh, there is no way I could ever get it done in that amount of time. And if you have more time to give it, that's great. I'm jealous. But when we talk about available time, for every one of us, it's limited. And the more time we spend on our online teaching, the less time we have for other aspects of our life. Whether that's another job, whether that's family, whether it's friends, whether it's our house, whether it's ourselves and our personal care. Time is limited. And so every minute we give to online teaching is a minute that we can't give somewhere else. And so today we're going to talk about how do we take that available time and how do we maximize it? How do we get the most out of it so that we can really serve our students well while also preserving our sanity and preserving and balancing those other aspects of our life. So with that said, let's dig right in. I've got 5 tips for you. And my first tip is don't waste a minute. And when I say don't waste a minute, I am dead serious about the minute. Because I have people that'll tell me things like, yeah, you know, I take a few breaks here and there. I might spend 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Well, let's pretend we spend 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 10 minutes here every day. That's 30 minutes. And if we do that 6 times a week, that's 3 hours. Well, if we only have 11 hours available for our online teaching, spending 3 of them doing a little bit here and a little bit there is a huge chunk of our time. So when I say don't waste a minute, I want you to start thinking about your teaching like you would think about a monetary budget. Just like when they tell you you want to, really balance your budget, they say you need to know where every dollar is spent. The same is true with your teaching. If you really want to get control of your teaching time, you need to start with a teaching budget. And you need to know where you're spending every minute, how many minutes you're spending, and what you can do to really maximize the impact of those minutes. If you don't know where your minutes are going, there's absolutely no way you can recoup them. So you want to start by thinking about, what do I spend my time on? Now, we have some research from students about what they think we should be spending our time on. And we asked students, these were all online students, these actually spanned everywhere from undergraduate all the way up to graduate. If you haven't muted your line yet, go ahead and mute your line. It just prevents getting feedback for everyone else. Thank you. And we asked students, what do you think your instructors do that really helps your learning? And if you look at the graph on the screen here, what students overwhelmingly told us is instructors do two things that really help my learning. Instructors give me feedback, and instructors participate in our online discussions. Now, they said the other things we do also help, but just not nearly at the rate of feedback and discussions. Now, interestingly, when we asked faculty the same question, and we said, hey, faculty, what do you think you do that helps student learning? What faculty told us was, I make stuff. I make announcements, I make lectures, I make summaries, outlines, websites, videos. I give them content. And yet students said, that's nice, but it doesn't help me nearly as much as feedback and interaction. And so we actually did a second study where we looked at faculty that were considered good faculty. And good faculty was defined as students that had high students' persistence rates, so they went on to be successful in the next course. They tended to do well in the courses after this course, showing that they had mastered the prerequisite knowledge and skills. It was students that had good, faculty that had good grade variance, they had good student end of course evaluations, and they had good peer review scores. So these were, generally speaking, good online faculty. And what we did is we tracked where those good faculty spent their time. Not surprisingly, good faculty spent the majority of their time doing the two things that students told us really help their learning. About 43% of their time was spent on grading and feedback, and about 30% of their time was spent in discussions. They were facilitating, they were interacting. And so when we think about what does this mean for us, what does this mean when we start doing our teaching budget? It doesn't mean that we need to start saying, oh gosh, I've got to spend 17 hours or whatever it is. But what it does tell us is we know the percentage of time that the good faculty spend. And so a good place to start that budget is to allocate your time as a function of those percentages. And yes, Brian, I would be happy to share the slides afterwards. I'll give you my email at the end, and anybody can email me and I'll shoot you out the slides, no problem. But if we look at the numbers then, what it tells us is about 10% of our time should be on like interaction, text, email, those kind of things, the one-to-one communication. The live stuff, the synchronous interaction, about 8%, content development, 9%, discussion facilitation, again, about 30%, grading and feedback, about 43%. To make this nice rounding numbers, let's pretend that we have about 10 hours per week per class for our teaching. What that means is your budget would start, if you have 10 hours, about 4 of those need budgeted for grading and feedback, about 3 of them for discussion facilitation, 1 for content development, 1 for synchronous interaction, and 1 for asynchronous communication. But it's not enough just to know how many. Good question, Alice. I'll get there, I promise. You also have to ask yourself, what does this look like? Well, you need to start saying, when would I spend that time? How many minutes would I spend on which day, and where am I going to spend it? It's not enough to say I'm going to spend an hour. You have to know when, exactly when. And this becomes really, really obvious for us if you start thinking about things like working out. They always say, oh, just say working out. You're going to put it in your schedule. But if you look at your schedule and you don't have 30 minutes to work out, and you don't have 30 minutes to shower after you work out, no matter how much we say I'm going to work out for 30 minutes, it will not happen. So you have to look at your schedule and actually say, when am I going to do this? So maybe you're going to go through your budget and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to limit myself to 5 minutes per day on my course-related emails, and maybe 10 minutes a couple different times a week on course administration, doing reports, things like that. Maybe 30 minutes in each of these other places. You have to start going through and figuring out, when am I going to do this? Now, people have started asking things like, well, how many students does this count for? The reality is, it doesn't matter. Because if you have 10 students, which would be a luxury for most of us, and you have 10 hours a week, what this means is you're just going to get a lot more time per student. But because you have 60 students, that doesn't mean you have more time in your life. As we already mentioned, time is limited. So that's why I don't tell people, look at this and say the hours. You can't start with the hours, because then you start going, well, now I've got 6 classes and I need to do 10 hours per class, and that's 60 hours. If you don't have 60 hours, you don't have 60 hours. So then that means you have to figure out how to make more, how to get more impact out of the hours you have. If we want to push this even further as a function of those number of students, let's take, for example, 25 students. Look at and think about, what does this mean for you? If you have 25 students and you only have 3 hours for discussion, and you have 2 discussion questions per week, and each of them, that means that you'd have about 45 minutes for the main post, 45 minutes for the peer replies. That's 25 posts. That means you only get 2 minutes per post, 1 minute per peer reply. Now, I say this not to make you think like, well, that's not reasonable, because we have to continue to go back to the idea of our time is limited. So even if you tell yourself, you know, it really is going to take me longer than that, the question is, where do you find that time? It might take you longer, and that if you have 20 hours a week, then you will have more time available. But most of us do not have unlimited time. And so we have to really realistically think about, how much time can I invest in any given student post, in any given assignment, in any given grading? And if I need to invest more time because I can't do it that quickly, then I'm going to have to find somewhere else to take away that time, because time is limited. Adding tasks somewhere has to take away tasks somewhere else. And Patricia had a good comment here. She said, you know, when I do coaching calls, it's almost always 40 to 60 minutes. Well, then Patricia is either going to have more time per week that she has available to her to spend, or she's going to have to find other places to take away that time. Time isn't indefinite, as much as we wish it was. So if you have coaching that you need to do and you're spending a lot more time on coaching calls, then you're going to have to take away time from something else. In fact, our research told us that when we ask faculty about their time available, it is limited. And every time we ask them to attend a faculty development seminar, when we ask them to come to conference presentations like this, it doesn't add to the time they're investing. It actually subtracts from the time they have for students, because our available time is our available time. We can't give more than we have to give. And so we have to start looking at, how can we either condense some of these things, make them happen faster, or figure out what things we quit doing altogether. There's a principle that became really, really important to me. It's called Parkinson's Law. And Parkinson's Law essentially tells us any given task will take however much time you have available. And so if we think about this in terms of our teaching, if we have available 40 to 60 minutes to do something, it'll probably take us that. But if we don't have that time available, we will figure out how to be more efficient, how to streamline, and how to make it happen faster. If you want to think about how this applies to your own life, I'll share with you my very clear example of Parkinson's Law. On Saturday mornings is our weekly house cleaning day. And typically it'll take my family of 6 about 3 hours to clean our house. We have a fairly large house. And yet, when we get a phone call that a friend is unexpectedly in town and they'll be at our house in 20 minutes, magically, we can go faster. We can figure out what tasks are not that important. We can figure out which things need done first. We can do things faster. We can do things with more intensity, and we can do things with more efficiency, because we only have that much time available. Now let's apply this to our online teaching. We did a study, and this was with people teaching online doctoral classes. And one of the assignments in their class was to write a literature review. And we asked faculty to monitor, on average, how long it was taking them to grade these literature reviews. And what they told us is it was taking them about an hour to grade the literature reviews. And we said, okay. And then we said, we have a challenge for you. We'd like you to see if you can grade them in 30 minutes. And overwhelmingly, the faculty told us, no way. There is no way I could get this done in half the time. And we said, please try. And we reminded them they were being paid to participate in our study. And what happened is, all of them were able to grade the papers in 30 minutes. So then we said, well, I wonder if you could do it in 20 minutes. And again, they overwhelmingly told us impossible. We were working as fast as we could when we did it in 30 minutes. And we said, well, just try, see if you can. 90% of them were able to grade the paper in 20 minutes. Now, if you're thinking like a researcher, I want you to think about the potential questions that this brings up. The most obvious one is, yeah, but what was the quality of the feedback? Because that's what takes us time. How good was the feedback you could give in 20 minutes compared to the feedback you could give in 60 minutes? And so we tested that. And we took the papers, and we had 3 conditions: papers graded in 60 minutes, papers graded in 30 minutes, and papers graded in 20 minutes. And we randomly assigned those papers anonymously to a group of independent raters, and we said, rate the quality of the feedback. And what we found was there was no significant differences. Independent raters could not tell by assessing the quality of feedback whether it was graded in 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or 60 minutes. If we go back to Parkinson's law, what this tells us is that when somebody knew exactly how much time they had available, when they had a goal, when there was literally a timer on their desktop counting down, they focused more. They got intense. They worked harder. They worked faster. They literally were able to make it happen. Now, can I tell you magically how they were able to focus more? No, I can't. I don't know. But what we do know is when they were racing the clock, they could do it. They focused in on the more important aspects. They integrated strategies to be able to streamline those repetitive tasks. And they were able to do it faster. Yes, Vicki, it was the same papers, the exact same. Now, any given instructor didn't grade the exact same paper because we didn't want it to be a repetitive effect. We didn't want that to happen. So we would take the same papers and give them to a new set of instructor, like it was a mixed group randomized kind of a thing. So the same groups each got them in a different order. So yeah, it was the same papers, different people. So then Sarah asks, did their stress levels go up? What they actually ended up reporting to us is when they started doing this, it was a little more stressful. And they said it was more stressful because they felt like it was a game, that they were on a game show and they had to beat the clock. But they also reported once they got used to it, it was relieving because now their budget started to say things like, I have 1 hour for grading and I need to get 3 papers done. And then they would say, you know what? I got them done and I had 10 minutes to spare. So now I had 10 minutes to reallocate to a new task. The idea that they put boundaries on their world and they had natural starts, stops, and breaks. And when they started adjusting to these self-imposed boundaries and breaks and starts and stops, the relief of having boundaries overload that intensity. But yes, when they first started doing this, they said it was like you were competing and it was a game and it was like, oh my gosh, I've got to get this done. But once they got over that and it turned into this like, no, this isn't about I need to grade. It's here's exactly what I need to get done. It's how many minutes I have to get it done. And when I do 3 or 5 or 10, I'm done. Now, I don't want the message to be, oh, it takes 20 minutes to grade a paper. What you actually need to do is look at your own stuff and figure out how much can I shave off if I can be more focused and more intentional. Some of you will never be able to get it down to 20 minutes because of the nature of the assignment. Some of you will be lucky to be able to, get it down to an hour. But if you can get it down, you're making progress towards the efficiency. In other classes, I rarely have these big, large doctoral papers. For me, it's usually more like 15 to 20 papers in my 2-hour time blocks that I do. And so it really depends on where you start. So what I encourage you to do is take your baseline and start challenging yourself to figure out how much you can shave off. How many minutes can you get it down to? Alice, the feedback they were doing was actually just embedded feedback within the paper. So they were supposed to be looking at minimal writing comments and mainly focusing on the content quality within the paper. But as you said, it really depends. Some people are going to be able to say, you know what, I've got 5 minutes of paper. Other people are going to be lucky to get it to 30. But Parkinson's law says, really be intentional about this. Think about what we're trying to get them to focus on. What are we needing to give them in terms of feedback? And the key here was setting your budget and sticking to it. And so if you need timers to do this, there's lots and lots of options. I'm not going to go through these with you right now, but just being able to know how much time you have to invest and what you hope to accomplish within that given time. The other piece of this that we also found was important was just the idea of batching. Many faculty told us that when they go to grade papers, they'll pull up the LMS, but in the background, they'll also still have their chat on, they'll still have their email on, they'll have other things on, and they'll say, you know, it just takes me a couple minutes to jump over and answer a quick email and come back. But if we go back to our message of don't waste a minute, every time we jump out, even if it's just for a couple minutes to take care of a task, and then jump back in and refocus on what we're doing, we're wasting a few seconds here, a few seconds there, shutting down just little pieces. If you could just reclaim 30 minutes of your time, 30 minutes a week when we only have 10 hours available is a huge chunk of time. So if we can batch that and avoid the minutes wasted when we're refocusing and jumping around and trying to take care of multiple things at one time, we can start to streamline that. Also related to batching our tasks is a principle that comes out of economics, and it's called Pareto's principle. And what Pareto discovered is we spend a lot of time doing things that don't necessarily matter. And typically, the vast majority of our impact comes from some dedicated, intentional time. So now if we go back to our grading and our feedback in our papers and what we're doing, you have to ask yourself, am I investing time grading those papers, doing things that don't have an impact? Are your students reading it? Do you know they're reading it? Do you know they're using it? Are you giving them the feedback in a format they understand? Are we actually knowing that that expenditure of time is giving us a return on our investment? And we're going to talk in just a few minutes about how to maybe gauge some of those things. But often what we find is people tell me, you know, I take so much time grading the papers. And we get in there and we start looking and they're doing a phenomenal job editing the writing and helping with sentence structure and picking up typos. When in the end, that didn't necessarily have a big impact on student learning. And so sometimes we're actually spending time on things that don't have the intended impact. So the other thing you have to ask yourself is, what is the intended impact of my grading? What do I hope students will get when they look at this feedback? And then focus your time in on that piece of the feedback, that part of the learning experience that they really is going to impact their learning. And if there's other parts that don't, maybe we're going to find other strategies. Maybe rather than doing it one-on-one for the students, we're going to start doing things like taking advantage of the Writing Center or having them do peer-to-peer activities to improve the quality of that writing before it ever gets to us. So it's not that we don't want to address those other things, but perhaps addressing them in one-to-one feedback is an inefficient investment of our time. So if we start thinking about how do we streamline and focus on the things that matter to us, there's also online tools for that. We can have it sort our emails right away so that we can, you know, at several dedicated times per day to respond to our students' emails. We can actually use software to help us schedule and monitor that time. We can use different techniques and software to help us to save and reuse the content and announcements and things like that. The idea isn't the focus on the technology. It's to focus on what matters. Where am I going to have an impact? And really focusing that time on that impact and not wasting any of our minutes on things that aren't actually going to impact our student learning experience. So related to that, and I already hit on a few of these things, is if we're going to streamline our time and we're going to really focus on the things that have an impact, we have to know which things those are. When we look at the research, it overwhelmingly tells us there's 3 things we do that have an impact on student learning. We interact with them, we're there, we're present, we're responsive, and we give them feedback. So to start with your teaching ROI, you need to ask yourself, am I investing any time on things that don't link clearly to one of these areas? And if it doesn't link clearly to one of these areas, that might be a good place to start getting rid of tasks so that you have time available. Oops, we need somebody to mute. We can hear somebody in the background.
Mr. Nudie.
And Bob, you might have the ability to mute others, and that could help. But so part of it is actually deciding what not to do because it doesn't have.
Do not like clothes.
For example.
How silly is that?
Oops, let me see here if I can mute people. Just a moment. I don't know if I have that capability or not, but let me try. Nope, I don't think I have that ability. So Bob, if you have that ability to be able to mute others, that might be helpful. Thank you.
He wasn't?
So anyway, start looking at where you invest your time and asking
Probably.
yourself, are the students using it? As an example, I had one faculty member tell me that he makes really, really good video feedback for his students.
So
And
did
he
you
said,
ever
you know,
find
I
out
will
what
actually spend
Austin's high school was?
approximately,
Oh,
Dee
you don't know
Barton,
if it's that Deer Valley?
if Dee Barton could mute the line, that would be super helpful, as well as John. We have John Abel and Dee Barton that we can hear in the background. So if you are able to think about or monitor what are students using, and I'll go back to my example here. Sorry, I got distracted. I have one faculty member tell me that he makes these really, really good videos. And he said he spends about 10 to 15 minutes making good feedback videos and giving them to every student. And I said, oh my gosh, that's amazing. You know, what do students say about it? And he's like, well, you know, that's kind of the hard part. I've only found like about 10, 15 students out of my class of 40 actually look at them. And I said, well, then you're making how many minutes of videos that are never, ever watched? And he said, well, you know, I spend a few hours per week doing it, but I don't know who's going to watch them and who's not. And my question to him was, have you asked? Because we actually could ask students things like, are you going to watch the videos? Because if so, I'll give you video feedback. And if you're not going to watch the video, then I'll just give you the typical written feedback. Likewise, we can ask students, are you reading my feedback in my papers? And if their answer is no, not really, we could start to streamline that. Students, if they're not going to use the resources we give them, we are getting absolutely no return on our investment. The reality is, learning only occurs when students are engaged. They will not learn from something they will not use, period. No matter how good it is, no matter how amazing it is, if they won't use it, they're not going to learn anything from it. And so we ask students, you know, what impacts your learning? What do you want us to give you? Interestingly, students rated as the highest thing. Students told us that text from their instructor and text from the internet and the textbook were pretty darn good. And instructors told us that's some of the fastest stuff I can create. Now, the bad news to this is we followed up with students, and what we found is just because they know that reading the text is the best way for them to learn, they also told us, yeah, but I don't always like reading. I get tired of reading. And so even though they know that reading is good for them, they're not necessarily willing to read. So then you can look at your own class and you can say, okay, well, if you're not willing to read, what are you willing to do? And it's perfectly fine to ask students, would you rather I just give you short summative feedback at your papers at the end? Would you rather that I embed this? Would you rather I give you a video? Because if you're not going to use it, I'm not going to invest time making it. And so what students do tend to like is multimedia. And at the moment, our research shows that students are more likely to watch video feedback if they know it's available. Now, they do have to know it's available. A lot of students reported that they still aren't even that good in the LMS and they don't realize they can click on the numerical grade in the grade book to get the feedback and all those kind of things. So we have to maybe make sure we're informing students of how to get the feedback, but they do like it. So if they like it at the moment, they're more willing to use it. And so just that alone can be really helpful. They also told us that even though they know text is valuable for them, that they also really kind of like watching videos sometimes. And what's becoming increasingly popular for students is actually being able to listen to the information. And they told us what they love about listening is that it's more mobile. They can do it in the car, they can do it while they're multitasking. Does that mean it's best for their learning? Not necessarily. But if I have the choice between writing stuff that they'll use, or excuse me, writing stuff that they won't use, or recording stuff that they might use, a better return on my investment of time is going to be recording the stuff that they might use. The other thing that we can do is we don't always have to start from scratch. We can customize things that are already there. Canvas Commons has a great library of already available resources. whether these are announcements, instructional content, content that you want to use as a component of your feedback, lots of different ways that we can do that. But sometimes we don't need to start from scratch. For me personally, I use a 20-minute rule. If I can't find what I need online in 20 minutes, then I'll make my own. Or if I know I can make it in 20 minutes and that's faster than I could go looking for it, I'm just going to make my own. But oftentimes we can start by using things that are already available. The other thing that you should always start with is you want to start with what is supported by your university. Because oftentimes your university will have content libraries, your university will have tools, your university will have preferred multimedia options. And when they're preferred options, now you're also going to have the built-in tech support so that you don't have to make any investment of time in tech support for your students because the institution offers that as well. So you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of what's already available before you dive in and start doing something else. When we're looking at what's already available, oftentimes you're going to be able to find really good pieces of content. Pieces, whether those pieces are a complete website, whether they're a video, a something from YouTube, but actually going in and seeing what are students willing to use. Can a web quest actually walk them through the assignment ahead of time and clean up the common conceptual errors that you tend to make feedback about so that you can not only improve the quality of the work, but you can simultaneously decrease that need for one-to-one feedback? Anytime we can start to strip off a couple minutes here and there, those couple minutes add up. And those savings of minutes allow us to start to reinvest them into other aspects of the instructional experience that will really impact student learning. One of the other things I often do is I engage my students as co-creators of content. If I find that students are consistently struggling with some sort of a conceptual error, I'll say, hey, bonus assignment. I noticed a lot of people were struggling with X. I will award so many points if somebody can, put together a website, a multimedia piece. Maybe it's going to be some short little clip, whatever it is. And then students can submit that. And then I can quickly evaluate those. And rather than me spending the time making those myself, now I can go back to students and say, hey, you made a really good whatever it was. Would you mind if I use this again in the future? And I have yet to have a student tell me, no, I don't want you to use that. No, you aren't allowed to be able to, take advantage of that. In fact, students are often really, really proud of these pieces. And I point out to them they can even use it in their own portfolios as an example of what they've mastered in this course. And then I save the time in creating that instructional content by allowing my students to engage more deeply in the material. Keep in mind, if you do this, you want to ask the students for their permission to reuse that material for others. And as you're doing all of this stuff, the idea is make sure you're getting a return on your investment. So monitor it. You can look at page views. Somebody earlier commented, I think, that Canvas will give us the page views. Depending on what you're using for videos, you might be able to look at how long they're watching the videos. You can look and see how much they're participating in a given discussion. I tend to use Loom to give video feedback. I can go into Loom and actually see, did they watch the video? And I can see how many times they watched the videos. Sometimes you can figure out, where they're investing their time and energy and what they know and don't know by the questions they missed, doing a quick item analysis of an online quiz, and now only spending those time in class on the areas that they were really struggling. So we can start to streamline our time based on what students are doing. If you teach in something like Canvas, which is one of the more common ones, there are course analytics. Go into the course analytics, take a look. When do students come to class? What are they not doing? What are they doing? What are the days that they're most likely to be available? In the videos, not only are they watching them, but what are they fast forwarding through? Which videos do they start watching but then not finish? One of the things that I discovered was that students were absolutely fast forwarding through the first 2 or 3 minutes of the videos that I would create, because I would spend those 2 or 3 minutes trying to connect with them. So I would, do the, hey, how's it going? Greetings from Nebraska. The weather here is great. I tried to make it seem like we were having kind of an informal hallway conversation before I would dive into the content. Well, what I discovered when I looked at my video analytics was students were fast forwarding right through that stuff. So if they're going to fast forward through it and not watch that part, why don't I save the 3 minutes per video by not recording it? Again, if I'm going to try to save every minute and I make 4 or 5 videos a week and I can save 2 or 3 minutes per video, I can save 10 minutes. I can now reallocate that 10 minutes into something else that will have a bigger impact on the student learning experience. And as you start to create all of these different things, make sure you are super crazy organized. Save it. Save all of it. Even discussion posts. And I've had a lot of instructors tell me, yeah, but my discussions were organic and, we have different themes and different comments. And I agree. But we've also done an analysis where we look at how much content is truly novel to any given course. And what we find is when we look at discussions, about 50% of the discussion errors and conceptual misunderstandings are very, very consistent from one course to the next. And so even if we just save some of those clarification posts and we have them right there ready in our pocket to use when the student comes, because now if it took me 5 minutes the first time to make it, but now it only takes me 1 minute to find it and use it this time, I've just saved 4 minutes. So start thinking about all the different things you do where you create content and reuse it so that you don't have to continue to reinvest that time. Likewise, discussions are another area that we spend about 30% of our time in. When I ask faculty, how do you know when your online discussion is over? Overwhelmingly, they tell me, well, I run out of time. Like it's over because the due date ends and it ends, and so we move on to the next discussion. But what if you actually had a lesson plan with an outline of your learning objectives? And when you had met all those learning objectives, you could actually tell students, you could just hop in there and say, hey, here were the learning objectives that we had for this week. Here were the key terms that we had that we needed to cover. Here were the key points of these research pieces that I wanted to bring together. Here's kind of the synthesis that we came to in this discussion. And because we've already done it, I'm going to step out. I've done, my part. We got there. And so continue on. But I'm going to reduce my time now because we've got there. I actually call this, kind of the balance of the dogs and cats. We hear a lot about the use of classroom assessment techniques where we go in and we kind of have these prepared discussion posts designed to gauge students' understanding and see if they're on the right track. They tend to be really short. We can give really brief little feedback, but we can also save the dogs. These are ongoing things. These are the informational posts that we create that we say, okay, I know they're going to have a conceptual error on this, so I'm going to dive deeper and I'm going to write this and I'm going to save it. And when they're ready for it, I'm going to have this one ready to go. We also can start just to streamline the time we spend in the discussions themselves. Research tells us there is a sweet spot. We need to be actively engaged to have a good discussion, but we shouldn't over-dominate it. When you're posting too much, you actually hurt the quality of the discussion. So actually being able to get in there, using your lesson plan as a guide and kind of poke and prod and ask some questions and do some follow-ups and then step back out and let the students go. So we want to, first of all, make sure that we're not wasting a minute. Second, we want to make sure that we are following and understanding the return on our instructional investment. The third thing we want to do is just streamline some of those repetitive tasks. Students have very consistent errors. They have very consistent problems. Most of our online courses use a relatively consistent set of assignments. We know when students are going to struggle. We know what writing things they have trouble with. So if we can start to shift the experience, so we start to use one-to-many resources, because there's one of us and a lot of them, and we put, excuse me, less time, sorry, choking, less time on the one-to-one feedback, we can start to streamline that experience and still give students the detailed feedback that they need. So if we can create a more holistic approach, we start expanding feedback and we think of it as more than just grading. and the comments that we give in grading. And we start to do things like feed forward. I actually make a screencast for every one of my assignments in advance, where I take a sample assignment from the past, where I've asked a student if I can use their assignment, take their name off of it and all that good stuff. We make it anonymous and get their permission. But then I make a screencast where the students listen to me walking through that assignment, talking about how I'm grading it, what the common errors are, where they're going to lose points, how different pieces relate to the rubric, what I'm looking for structure, format, all those things. Rather than waiting for them all to make mistakes and then me spending time giving them feedback, I spend time once up front, and I give them feed forward information to prevent the mistakes. And when they don't make those mistakes, I don't have to spend time giving them feedback on them. Likewise, you can use peer-to-peer assignments to clean things up before you ever get them. What research tells us is peer-to-peer can be a total bomb. And it can fail miserably when students don't know exactly what to do. What ends up happening is they start just telling each other, good job. Like, yep, that looked really good. I liked how you did whatever. But if we can give them really clear guidance about what they're doing with that peer-to-peer feedback, students are pretty good at it. I use peer-to-peer feedback a lot to clean up the writing and the APA style in my classes and formatting issues. So I'll make a very detailed checklist or rubric, and then I will reassign them their assignments to each other, and they have to go through the other person's assignment and do that very detailed, looking for, did their citations look like this? Did their references look like this? Did their headings like this? And then they exchange them back, and I tell them, fix your papers based on the peer-to-peer feedback, and now submit them to me. So they clean up some of those errors that would have taken me time to give them feedback. The other thing I do is if I start to notice trends in the errors that students are having, I'll often quit making those really individual detailed comments, and I'll say something like, see the announcement on X. And then I'll go in and I'll make one announcement where I'll say, okay, I want everyone to look at your paper. If I made this comment, this is what you need to focus on. If I didn't make this comment, you were probably in pretty good shape, but I want you to glance at it anyway because this was a common error or a common problem. So now, instead of investing, again, a lot of time doing the one-to-one, I'm going to shift that back to a one-to-many and refocus them. Related to that, I also look at just the feedback that I'm embedding within the paper. If there's one thing you can take from this presentation today to really maximize the impact of your time investment, it's to use a text expander on your feedback. You can get somebody to mute. You can hear somebody in the background. What our research tells us is there's only about 3% of the comments that we make that are actually individualized to one person and one person only. Now, that doesn't mean that the other 97% is copy and paste to everyone. But what it means is any given comment in a class of 25 students, we're probably going to use it 4 or 5 times at least, if not 10 or 15 times. Now, it won't be the same comments to the same students, but various students are going to struggle with that. And so you can use text expanders to save those comments. And now, rather than having to retype that information, you can just use that text expander, and in a couple quick keystrokes, you can put that right in there. If you're not familiar with text expanders, this is one that there's lots of resources online, or reach out to me privately and I'll send you more information on how to use text expanders. The fourth tip is related to the first 3, and it's just anticipate those challenges. You know where students are going to struggle, so prevent the problems before they happen. As somebody just mentioned earlier, they use an FAQ document. So do I. Going in there and saying, okay, here are some of the common problems. So rather than emailing me or struggling or waiting and having the error and needing to respond, let me just give you all the necessary information and resources right now. Let's start out ahead of time and get you there. Likewise, we know from the research, students often fail to go into the LMS to get the information they need. Well, we can grumble and groan about that, or we can integrate push technology. So now I actually send out via Remind, which students sign up for if they want to. I'll just send out a quick remind that says, hey, papers are graded, check the gradebook. that one quick thing increased students' use of that information, which in turn then impacted my return on investment of my time. When I warned them that it was there, they used it. I also started looking at where do students struggle and building opportunities for them to get remedial help when they need it. So when I know they're going to struggle with APA style, I don't wait, let them struggle, and then give them feedback. I say, hey, here's a little quiz about APA style. Take it. Now, if you missed this question, here's a little module to help you on that. If you missed this question, here's a little module to help you on that. But I build these resources in advance so that now any student can use them. And if we go back up to what I talked about as using students as co-creators, many of my modules were built by students in advance. So there's lots of things that we can do to start to build in resources, build in one-to-many opportunities that prevent us from having to spend our one-to-one time on either the grading and feedback or on answering the email. And our last tip, after I talked about all of these different technologies, is to limit the supplemental technology. And as an example, there's this great little meme out, and it talks about what happened with Russia. And what it says is Russia discovered that ballpoint pens would not work in zero gravity. So to combat this, they did all this research, they spent all this time, $12 billion to develop a pen that writes in zero gravity, can write in freezing, it can do all these amazing things. Why we wasted all that money and time, the Russians used a pencil. Now, the fact that this is not a true story is irrelevant to our point. The point is, we shouldn't start with something fancy just because we can. You should not use a single piece of technology if it doesn't directly help you in some way. Every time you have to learn a technology, every time you have to troubleshoot a technology, help a student with a technology, that's a minute of your time that you have to spend. And we don't want to waste a minute. So if you only have, again, we're saying on average 10 hours, we don't want to waste any of that time on technology that is not going to help you in some sort of way. So you want to ask yourself, if I'm going to use a technology, what's my return on the investment? Is it going to help me increase learning? Is it going to foster engagement? Is it going to save me time and sanity? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, then by all means use it. Invest that time in the technology because you're going to get a return on your time. But if it's not, don't use it. We have to be holistic. We can't just look at this as an end product. And so you should also go back and think about, what can I automate in my course? How can I bring in drill and practice? How can I adjust the assignment so that there's some peer review? I had a couple people that need to mute. But just looking at it overall, how do we do this? And administratively, how do we help by giving consistent schedules so we don't waste time, digging around and learning a new course? How do we give adequate preparation time? The goal is to teach smarter. And so to teach smarter, we need to make sure we're spending that limited time we have doing things that matter. And when our time is invested, we need to know that it's actually invested on something that's going to impact the student learning experience. With that said, we are pretty much straight up out of time, but if there's time, and Bob, you hop in and tell me if there's time, I'd be happy to answer questions here. And if there's not time to answer questions here, I would be more than happy to answer questions via email. And so my email's on the screen and everybody can reach out. If you'd like a copy of the slides, just shoot me an email and I'd be happy to email you a copy of these slides. With that said, I'll just be quiet and see if anything pops up.
Oh, Gene, that's really useful stuff. Exactly what we look for. You always have a good presentation.
Well, thank you. Again, when I know that I'm getting an hour of your time, an hour of time is huge. And so if I'm going to give you an hour, I hope I'm giving you some return on this hour of investment.
Yeah. Well, we're really out of time. We got to move to the next presentation. But as always, Gene, thanks. I hope we have you back next year, too. And thanks, everybody. We got one more session today and hope to see you all there. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Bob. Have a great day.